All right, Unit 1 review, looking at a production possibility curve. We have 3 different points, point A, point B, and point C. Anything inside the production possibility curve refers to an inefficient outcome and wasted resources or idle resources. Anything that's on the line, like point B, would assume efficient use of resources and efficient output. And then any point beyond the curve would mean that it is unattainable currently, unless the society gets more resources or more technology to produce that much. So if we take a look at the other reason that we use production possibility curves, which is to show opportunity cost, we have the same production possibility curve with broccoli and pizza, and we have various levels. So it states the opportunity cost of changing production of broccoli from 10 to 15 units. So we were producing 10 of broccoli. Now we want to produce 15 of broccoli. What we're going to lose when we gain that, so we plus 10 broccoli, we're going to lose an amount of pizza, which in this case is 20 pizza, as we move from 60 quantity of pizza to 40. So we gain 10 broccoli, or gain 5 broccoli in order to lose 20 pizza. The 2 reasons that production possibility curves can shift, whether outwards or inwards, and in this case is outwards, is if society gets either more technology or more resources. Then this society is able to produce more products overall because they're going to be able to increase their potential output. Here's a representation of the economy we call circular flow, how our economy works. So we have the various players, households, businesses, and the market's resource and product. So if we follow the money trail first, households through the products market, we send money to businesses, and business sends money to us through the resource market as we sell our factors of production. So businesses put into the product market goods and services, and households through the resource market put in our factors of production, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So the economy goes round. Each market has both a buyer and a seller. Households are buyers in the product market and are sellers in the resource market. And likewise, firms are buyers in the resource market and they sell products in the product market. Then we get into our 4 factors of production, what we need in order to produce anything. First, you need land, any sort of natural resource like water, wind, land. We need labor, such as human resources, your quality, knowledge, skills, abilities. We need capital, such as machinery, tools, and technology. And entrepreneurship deals with the risk takers of the economy. And we need all 4 of those in order to produce. The more factors of production we have, the more we're able to produce. And that's why we shift the production possibility curve outwards. Now we get into markets, and we started with demand. So demand is downward sloping because it has an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So price and quantity. So when price rises, the quantity demanded falls. As the price goes up, we're not able to afford as much, so we lower the quantity demanded. So in this case, if we were to raise the price from $2 to $6, we would end up buying 4 less and moving from 6 quantity demanded to 2 quantity demanded. And likewise, when price falls, quantity demanded increases. So the inverse relationship, that's the law of demand. The reasons we can shift the demand curve comes from the acronym BRIGHTS, and your teacher might use a different acronym. And so the acronym stands for the number of buyers, more or less people buying means more or less demand. The price of related goods, which are complementary, things like peanut butter and jelly go together. Changes in income will affect demand. Changes in taste, preference, changes in expectations for future price, and changes in the price of substitute goods. Then we got into our supply curve, which is upward sloping, that when the price increases, quantity supplied increases as we're able to make probably more revenue and more profit. So if the price rises in selling a glass of lemonade from 10 cents a cup to $1 a cup, many more lemonade stands would pop up because as the price rises, you're able to generate more revenue and likely more profit from that. And likewise, when the price decreases, quantity supplied also decreases. So as we move along the supply curve is due to changes in price, which is the y-axis. So in order to shift supply, much like demand, if supply increases, we shift to the right, and if supply decreases, we shift to the left. Teacher may have used a different acronym than I'm using here with tenting, but what shifts supply are things like taxes and subsidies, expectations for future profit, the number of sellers, the amount or availability of technology, input prices, such as steel to a car or tires to a car, natural disasters, and government regulations. So as we get into some practice problems in terms of shifting supply and demand and what happens to price and quantity, we start with our equilibrium in a market. So we have supply and demand, here's a market, and in this case the market is for marshmallows as it says in the problem. So it says the price of sugar goes up. So the relationship between sugar and marshmallow is input prices, so that's going to shift supply. If the price of sugar increases, I'm going to buy less sugar. If I have less sugar, I'm going to make less marshmallows. So supply of marshmallows is going to decrease to the left, so S2. Have a new equilibrium, so that's my price 2, quantity 2. So I've noticed that price has risen and quantity has fallen at equilibrium. Another practice problem, in the Pepsi market, what happens when the price of Coca-Cola decreases? So Pepsi and Coke are substitute products, so that's going to shift my demand curve. If the price of Coke decreases, I'm going to buy more Coke, and since I've already drinking Coke, I don't need as much Pepsi, so the demand for Pepsi falls, so demand shifts to the left, and we notice a smaller price and a smaller quantity, so price and quantity both decrease. Here we are in the car market. If there's an increase in immigration, well, that's the number of buyers, which is on the demand side. More immigration means more buyers, means more demand. So demand is going to shift to the right, causing both price and quantity to increase as they move farther away from the origin. So price and quantity increase. In the computer market, if there's an increase in government regulations, so government regulations fit in that tenting, so that's going to be supply. And it's going to decrease because if government regulates the markets more, it's able to slow down the supply of products. So supply is going to decrease, causing the price to rise and the quantity to decrease at equilibrium. In the cell phone market, if there's increases in technology, make it cheaper to produce cell phones, so that's technology, or we could say input prices as well, but both affect the supply of cell phones. And supply is going to increase, shifting it to the right, causing there to be a lower price, but more quantity of cell phones at equilibrium. One of the last parts in market unit was the elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. So elasticity refers to how sensitive people are to a change in price. So if we look at two shapes of the demand curve in terms of which one is elastic and which one is more inelastic. We look at the more vertical curve here. Demand is relatively steep, and I tell my students to dot the I in that because it looks much more like an I in this case. So that's the inelastic demand curve, because when we change price a lot, we have a smaller change in quantity. And likewise with this, I kind of tell my students you can kind of make the E there. So this is the elastic curve, or elastic demand curve, because a small change in price leads to a much larger change in quantity. So in essence, in the elastic demand curve, it refers to that when you change the price on consumers, they are actually going to change their spending habits and reduce, or in this case, when the price falls, they're going to increase their spending on the good as it goes on sale. There are 4 reasons that a demand curve may be more or less elastic, and it has to do with substitutability. Are there good substitutes? If there are good substitutes, then the good is said to be more elastic because you can change your habit. If it's a luxury or necessity, so luxury goods tend to be more elastic because you don't need them, and necessity goods tend to have a more inelastic demand because you're going to need them regardless of the price. So some things like water are going to be hard to get rid of. Percentage of your budget, the example I have down below, If a pack of gum is 20% off, are you really going to buy more gum? Likely not, because even if the gum costs $1 and you're going to save yourself 20 cents, nobody's running to the store to make sure you buy a bunch of gum. However, if a nice pair of jeans is 20% off, and you're talking, like $100, $150 pair of jeans, in that case, you might be able to save $20, maybe even $30 off the price. So then people are going to be lining up much more often to buy the jeans because they're on sale. So those products would be more elastic because of percentage of your budget. And then lastly, time. In what time reference do you need them? If your tank is on empty in your car, you're going to need gas and pay whatever price is at the pump. But if your gas tank is more like a quarter full, you might stop if you see a good price, but otherwise you're just going to keep going. Calculating elasticity is where we use the total revenue method, which is price times quantity. So when you raise the price of the good and you end up with more total revenue, then the good is said to be inelastic. If you raise the price but make less total revenue, then the good is said to be elastic. If you change the price and total revenue is the same, then that's the third option, which is unit elastic. So if we use this as a model to try to figure out which one is elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic. Total revenue is price times quantity, so 4 times 20 is 80, and 5 times 10 is 50. So when I raise the price from $4 to $5, I end up making less money because revenue falls from 80 to 50. So when I raised the price, I made less total revenue. This is elastic. In the second problem, 3 times 20 is $60, and 2 times 22 is 44. Now in this case, when I raise the price from $2 to $3, I end up making more total revenue because 60 is greater than 44. So in this example, it's inelastic. And in the third example, when I multiply 1 times 20 and 2 times 10, total revenue is the same. So that's when the good is unit elastic. So in terms of our market structures, on the far right we have one seller, which would be indicated by a monopoly. Then we have, in the order of increasing the amount of sellers we have, is an oligopoly. Few large sellers dominating the industry. Many sellers selling differentiated products as monopolistic competition. And then many firms selling identical products, we have perfect competition. The characteristics of perfect competition are that there are many buyers and sellers producing identical products. Firms can easily enter and exit the market. Examples would be like livestock, corn, wheat, salt. So corn is a good example because products are indistinguishable. If I laid out 10 pieces of corn, you would not be able to easily identify where the corn came from. Unlike if I set down 10 pairs of headphones in front of you, you'd likely be able to tell who produced what because of the branding, the different designs. And so with perfect competition, firms have no effect on the price because there's too many companies and too many perfect substitutes to have any control over price. On the far end or other end of the spectrum, we have monopolies, which is a market structure with only one supplier and no close substitutes. They have lots of power over price, so can raise price without worrying about competition. Examples would be things like electricity, cable TV, U.S. Postal Service, first-class mail, all being monopolies for various reasons. Then with monopolistic competition, it has elements of both a monopoly and of perfect competition. Monopolistic competition is like a monopoly because they end up having a brand that makes people believe their product is better, so they're able to demonstrate some power over price. But monopolistic competition, like perfect competition, because there are many sellers and they have little control over the price because there are a lot of substitutes. An example of a monopolistic competition would be things like a restaurant. Think about how many different restaurants are within 20 or 25 minutes drive, probably 100 if not more. Now, each one has a different brand. They're each selling you a product that's a little bit different. They're selling you different versions of food, and they're all a little bit different at least. And so they try to create their brand of, this is what we sell here, but there are so many substitutes that they can't control price all that much because you can still go to the other 99 places for dinner. Oligopoly is a market structure dominated by just a few large firms. Because there are only a few sellers, each firm must consider the effects, so we say that they are interdependent. What one firm does controls the actions of the other. And examples of oligopolies would be things like steel, oil, automobiles, breakfast cereal, tobacco. Then with how to design a company, one way that you could do that is through opening up a proprietorship where you are going to be the sole owner and you and the business are the same because you're the owner. Advantages to a proprietorship include that it's easy to form and dissolve. So that's why there's the most number of businesses in the United States are sole proprietorships, because it wouldn't take much for me to start a business from scratch, just myself as a proprietorship. There's easy management. You start a business because you get profit, or that you hope to get profit, and those profits are only taxed once. You get to be your own boss. It's easy to dissolve the company. You don't have to worry about splitting its assets or anything because you are the company. The disadvantages are things like unlimited liability, that you are the sole owner and you and the business are the same, so if one of you go bankrupt, both of you do, you and the business, because you and the business are the same. There's a limited ability to raise funds, usually ends with the death of the proprietor, so we say it has limited life, because you are the business, so if you pass away, the business passes away as well. And it's limited to the experience that the owner has. Now, partnerships act the same way as a proprietorship, other than there's more than one person. So in terms of what's different, it's easier to manage because there's two or more owners in a partnership. It's easier to raise money. You're still taxed only once. The disadvantages include unlimited liability for a general partnership, and decision-making can become more complicated or frustrated as you have more than one boss trying to decide the future of the company. Or many proprietorships and partnerships at some point decide to incorporate the larger they get, because for the major reason, the advantage of having limited liability for owners. So the company and the owners are separate. So the corporation can be sued and can sue, and the owners are separated from that. You can pass down, so there's unlimited life in a corporation, which fixes the disadvantages of the other two types of business organizations. But the disadvantages include it's a little bit more difficult to start, there's more government regulation, especially around profits, and the individual and the corporation both get taxed, so there's double taxation. The various cost formulas are up on the screen. So total cost equals fixed plus variable. Total revenue, we already said, was price times quantity. Profit or loss is total revenue minus total cost. The break-even point is when total cost equals total revenue. The shutdown point is if total revenue is less than variable cost. And then we can also find marginal cost, and marginal revenue is the change in total cost or total revenue. So looking at the charts, the way I might go about doing this is starting and working my way kind of from left to right. So total revenue is price times quantity, so 20 times 0, 20 times 1, 20 times 2, 20 times 3, 20 times 4, 20 times 5. Then I might decide to go over to my marginal revenue column because that's change in total revenue. So 20 minus 0 is 20, 40 minus 20 is still 20, 60 minus 40, 80 minus 60, and 100 minus 80. Then for my fixed variable total cost, these go together, and that fixed plus variable equals total. So if I look down at the bottom here, fixed plus variable equals total, and that's 74. Now, fixed costs, if you remember, are all the same. So once you found one fixed cost, they're all the same. So fixed costs, regardless of how many units I produce, fixed cost is always the same. So now, it's always going to be held true that at 0 units, variable cost is always 0. So if this were blank instead, you'd know the variable cost of producing 0 units is 0. You're not hiring any labor if you're not producing any goods. So fixed plus variable equals total. 30 plus something gives me 33, so that's 3. 30 plus 11 gives me 41. 30 plus something gives me 54, and that's 24. And then down at the bottom, 30 plus 79 equals 109. So my marginal cost is change in total, so 33 minus 30 is 3. 41 minus 33 is 8. 54 minus 41 is 13. 74 minus 54 is 20. 109 minus 74 is 25. So in terms of profit, then, I'm taking total revenue minus total cost. So 0 minus 30 gives me negative 30. 20 minus 33 gives me negative 13. 40 minus 41 gives me negative 1. 60 minus 54 gives me positive 6. 80 minus 74 is also 6, and then 100 minus 109 is negative 9. So in this case, I can maximize profits at $6, but how many units would I produce is where MR equals MC of 20 equals 20. So I'm going to produce 4 units for that reason. It's the highest profit, and it's where MR equals MC, where 20 equals 20, which is my decisions for maximizing profit. Getting on to the supply and demand for labor. Supply might shift for labor, which is us as the workers supply labor. So might be things like taste for work, worker wealth, working conditions, and the demand for labor comes from the firm's aspect of they buy our labor. So it might come from, well, how easy is it to replace us, or the derived demand for labor, or the technology available to help the worker be more productive. So a key feature with the demand for labor is that it's equal to the marginal revenue product, the value of the marginal labor, which is simply the marginal physical product times the price of the output or the price of the product. So in this equation, if the workers become more productive, so let's say technology makes workers more productive and marginal physical product rises, then that's going to mean that MRP rises as well, because that's how it's going to work out in the equation. If instead the price of the final product falls, then MRP is going to fall due to the equation as well. So an idea of derived demand would be this question. What is the demand for workers in your school cafeteria derived from? So how many workers is demanded by the firm at various wages? And that has to do with, well, what's the demand for food in your cafeteria? What is the price of the food they're able to get? And what is obviously then the marginal productivity of the cafeteria workers? But derived demand is the idea that if more and more students are demanding the food in the cafeteria, then there's going to be an increase in the demand for the labor, the school cafeteria workers. Then our last unit, getting into government, we talked about whether or not goods are shareable, or in this case, rival. So can you share them? Are they rival? If they are rival, that means you can't share them. And if goods are excludable, meaning we're making people pay for those are the private goods like ice cream cones, clothing, congested toll roads. If we cannot share the goods, so it is rival, and we're not excluding people, those are the problem goods of common pool resources like fish in the ocean, the environment, congested non-toll roads, because the more I use them, the less there are for you, but we're not excluding people from paying, so they kind of say like, hey, it's free, so I might as well take what I can. Goods that you can share are non-rival are going to be things like, we would call these toll goods or natural monopolies, things like fire protection, cable TV, toll roads. Those are our toll goods. And then goods that we can share and are non-rival and non-excludable are public goods. Tornado siren, national defense, that fits under that category of public goods. Then with the various market failures, so we talked a lot about the semester about how markets are efficient, but sometimes markets are not efficient, and so government can step in and help. So the first example of market failure is inadequate competition. So sometimes there's too many monopolies. Sometimes there's not enough competition, and competition is needed on both sides. The more suppliers there are, the better it is for consumers, and the more buyers there are for products, the better it is for producers. So sometimes there's inadequate competition, and so government can step in and help make the market more efficient. The existence of externalities are another. Externalities are the unintended side effect that another person or action have on another. So activities can generate positive and negative, or sometimes both types of externalities. And so if we take the example of smoking, so if I walk into the store, I buy a cigarette, I've demanded it, there's some producer that sold it to me, they've sold it, and we both benefit because that's voluntary exchange. I benefit because I wanted the cigarettes, they benefited because they wanted the money, so we trade. But when I smoke around others, the negative externality is the secondhand smoke. So a third party, I go home and smoke around my wife, and she then is going to feel the negative side effects of my smoking. But she didn't benefit from purchasing the cigarette, but she definitely feels the cost of that cigarette. So positive externalities are a benefit somebody receives, although they did nothing to create that benefit or pay for it. So examples might be jobs, education, home improvement, pleasant aromas are in the air, like chocolate production in Chicago. As the pleasant aromas spill out into the open air, passers-by get to have a nice whiff of chocolate on their way into work. And lastly, negative externalities are a harm, cost, or inconvenience somebody incurs because of the actions of others. So examples might be crying babies in public or on an airplane. So I buy a seat to go to the airplane, but if I unfortunately sit next to or in front or behind a crying baby, my enjoyment of the flight greatly decreases because of that. Noise pollution is another thing. You live close to maybe a theater, like an outdoor venue, like the whatever they call the Tweeter Center now over in Tinley Park. There's going to be some noise pollution. It might make you worse off. Things like smoking, drunk driving all have negative externalities as somebody else is inconvenienced because of the consumption of some good.